The scorching African sun hung mercilessly over Ouagadougou, the bustling capital of Burkina Faso, as President Ibrahim Traoré's motorcade wound through the dusty streets toward the presidential palace. After 7 intensive days touring remote villages across the nation's northern provinces, Ibrahim felt the weight of exhaustion settling into his bones. The tour had been successful. He had inaugurated 3 new schools, 2 health clinics, and had listened to countless grievances. From farmers struggling with drought conditions, his populist approach to governance, which emphasized direct contact with citizens, had earned him unprecedented approval ratings among the people. The presidential palace, a modest colonial-era building that Ibrahim had refused to renovate with. Taxpayer money came into view as the motorcade approached the main gates. The building's whitewashed walls reflected the harsh afternoon light, creating an almost ethereal glow that seemed to mock the darkness that was about to descend upon it. Ibrahim had always preferred this understated residence to the grandiose palaces favored by many African leaders. It symbolized his commitment to servant leadership and fiscal responsibility. As the vehicle came to a stop in the palace courtyard, Ibrahim noticed the usual bustle of activity that typically greeted his return. Security personnel moved with practiced efficiency, advisors clutched their briefing folders, and domestic staff prepared for the evening's official functions. Yet something felt different today. The air seemed heavier, charged with intention. He couldn't quite identify. Colonel Samba, his trusted chief of security for the past 7 years, approached with his customary crisp salute. The colonel's weathered face, marked by decades of military service, bore its usual stoic expression, but Ibrahim detected something in his eyes. Was it nervousness? Guilt? The president dismissed the thought as a product of his own fatigue. "Welcome back, Mr. President," Colonel Samba said, his voice steady but lacking its usual warmth. "I trust your tour was productive?" "Indeed it was, Colonel. The people in the northern provinces continue to inspire me with their resilience and determination," Ibrahim replied, scanning the assembled crowd. "Where is Fatima? She's usually the first to greet me." A brief shadow crossed the colonel's face. "I believe the First Lady is attending to some urgent women's affairs meetings, sir. She left instructions that she would see you in your private quarters." Ibrahim nodded, though something about this explanation unsettled him. Fatima Traoré was indeed deeply involved in women's rights advocacy and educational reform, but she had never missed his homecoming ceremonies. In their 12 years of marriage, she had always been there, her radiant smile the first thing he saw upon returning from official travels. The couple had met during Ibrahim's early days as a military officer when she was completing her master's degree in social work at the University of Ouagadougou. Her intelligence, compassion, and unwavering commitment to social justice had attracted him immediately. More than just a political partner, she had become his moral compass, often challenging him to consider the broader implications of his policies on women and marginalized communities. As Ibrahim made his way through the palace corridors, exchanging brief greetings with staff members, he noticed subtle signs that something was amiss. Conversations ceased abruptly when he approached. Eyes avoided direct contact. The usual cheerful atmosphere seemed subdued, replaced by an almost funeral solemnity. Captain Gabriel, one of his most trusted intelligence officers, approached with visible hesitation. The young officer's normally confident demeanor seemed shaken, his hands trembling slightly as he saluted. "Sir, if I may have a word in private," Gabriel requested, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can it wait, Captain?" "I'm eager to see my wife after a week away," Ibrahim replied, though the officer's obvious distress was beginning to alarm him. Yes, sir, of course. Perhaps later would be better," Gabriel stammered, stepping back into the shadows. Ibrahim's unease deepened as he climbed the marble staircase leading to the private residential wing of the palace. The portraits of Burkina Faso's founding fathers, seemed to watch him with knowing eyes, as if they were privy to secrets he had yet to discover. The afternoon light filtering through the tall windows cast long shadows across the polished floors, creating an almost cinematic atmosphere of foreboding. The heavy wooden door to the presidential private quarters stood slightly ajar, which immediately struck Ibrahim as odd. Fatima was meticulous about privacy and security, always ensuring their personal space remained sealed from the bustling activity of the palace. The silence from within was absolute. No sound of running water from the bathroom, no rustle of papers from her study, no gentle humming that usually accompanied her evening routine. Ibrahim's heart began to race as he pushed open the door. The scene that greeted him would be seared into his memory forever, a nightmare tableau that would haunt his dreams for years to come. The bedroom, their sacred sanctuary that had witnessed countless intimate conversations about governing the nation and raising their hopes for the future, lay in complete ruins. The destruction was systematic yet chaotic. Furniture had been overturned with deliberate violence. The antique dresser that had belonged to Fatima's grandmother lay on its side, its contents scattered across the floor. Their wedding photographs, usually arranged with care on the nightstand, were now broken and trampled underfoot. The silk curtains, a gift from the wives of visiting diplomats, hung in tatters as if they had been slashed by knives. But it was the personal touches of devastation that struck Ibrahim most deeply. Fatima's favorite scarf, woven by artisans from her home village, lay torn and twisted in the corner like a wounded bird. Her reading glasses, which she wore while reviewing legislation and drafting speeches, were crushed beneath the overturned chair. The small potted jasmine plant she tended daily, brought from her mother's garden, lay wilted and broken, its soil scattered across the Persian rug that had been a wedding gift from the Turkish ambassador. Most alarming of all was the absence of Fatima's personal diary, a leather-bound journal she had maintained since their wedding day. She wrote in it every evening, recording her thoughts on the day's events, her observations about people they had met, and her ideas for social programs. The diary usually rested on her bedside table, but now that table lay overturned, and the diary was nowhere to be seen. Ibrahim stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to process the reality before him. 7 years of presidency had prepared him for many challenges: economic crises, political opposition, international pressure. But nothing had prepared him for this violation of his most private space, this attack on the woman who was his closest, confidant and strongest supporter. "Fatima!" he called out, his voice cracking with emotion. The name echoed through the empty rooms, bouncing off the walls and returning to him with cruel mockery. He rushed through their private quarters, the study where she wrote her speeches, the small kitchenette where she prepared traditional meals for intimate dinners, the balcony where they often sat in the evenings discussing the day's challenges. Every room bore signs of violent intrusion. Books were pulled from shelves, papers scattered across floors, drawers pulled out and emptied. Someone had conducted a thorough search looking for something specific, or perhaps simply intent on erasing every trace of normalcy from their lives. The bathroom mirror was cracked in a spider web pattern, reflecting Ibrahim's anguished face in fractured segments. The sight of his own distorted reflection snapped him from his paralysis into action. He pulled out his secure phone and pressed the emergency code that would summon his entire security team. "Code red! Presidential quarters! Now!" he barked into the device, his voice regaining its commanding authority even as his heart threatened to burst from his chest. Within seconds, the sound of running footsteps echoed through the palace corridors. Colonel Samba arrived first, followed by a team of security officers and Captain Gabriel. The colonel's face showed what appeared to be genuine shock and concern, though Ibrahim would later question whether this reaction was authentic. "Sir, what happened here?" Colonel Samba asked, surveying the destruction with what seemed like professional assessment. "Where is my wife?" Ibrahim demanded, grabbing the colonel by the shoulders. "Where is Fatima?" The security team immediately began securing the scene, calling for forensics experts and beginning the process of documenting the damage. But Ibrahim noticed that their movements seemed strangely rehearsed, as if they had been expecting this moment. The presidential palace transformed within hours from a seat of government into the epicenter of the most intensive investigation in Burkina Faso's modern history. Police cordoned off the residential wing, forensics experts dusted every surface for fingerprints, and intelligence officers began the massive task of reviewing security footage from the dozens of cameras positioned throughout the compound. Ibrahim paced the length of his office, his usual composed demeanor replaced by barely contained fury and desperate worry. He had changed from his travel clothes into a simple black shirt and pants, as if preparing for battle. The sight of their destroyed bedroom had awakened something primal within him, not just the concern of a husband for his wife, but the rage of a man whose most fundamental beliefs about safety and sanctuary had been shattered. "Report!" he demanded as Colonel Samba entered with the initial security assessment. "Sir, we have reviewed all access logs for the past 48 hours, the colonel reported, consulting his tablet. No unauthorized personnel entered the residential wing. All security checkpoints were manned and operational. There are no gaps in our surveillance coverage." "Then how did someone enter our bedroom and take my wife?" Ibrahim's voice rose with each word. "How did they destroy our private quarters without being detected by a single camera?" Colonel Samba's hesitation was barely perceptible, but Ibrahim caught it. "Sir, we are still analyzing the footage. Perhaps there was a technical malfunction, or—" "No maybes!" Ibrahim slammed his fist on the desk. "I want answers, not excuses. My wife is missing, and someone in this building knows how it happened." Captain Gabriel approached cautiously, carrying a thick file. "Mr. President, we've compiled a list of everyone who had access to the palace during your absence. This includes permanent staff, visiting officials, maintenance workers, and security personnel." Ibrahim snatched the file and began scanning the names. Many were people he had known for years, trusted individuals who had served his administration faithfully. The thought that one of them might have betrayed that trust was almost as painful as Fatima's disappearance itself. "I want every one of these people questioned," he ordered. "Use polygraph tests, background checks, financial audits, whatever it takes. And I want the results within 24 hours. The palace staff, meanwhile, had gathered in small groups throughout the building, whispering among themselves and casting nervous glances toward the sealed residential wing. Many had worked in the palace for decades, serving multiple administrations. They had grown fond of Fatima, who always remembered their children's names, inquired about their family's health, and ensured they were fairly compensated for their work. Maria Sesuma, Fatima's personal assistant and closest confidant among the staff, was found weeping in the First Lady's office. The middle-aged woman had served the presidential family for 5 years and had developed a maternal affection for Fatima, who was nearly 20 years her junior. "She was like a daughter to me," Maria sobbed to the investigating officers. Just yesterday morning, before the president left for his tour, she was so excited about the new literacy program for rural women. She stayed up late working on her speech for next week's conference. The investigators pressed Maria for any unusual behavior or concerning comments from Fatima in recent days. Through her tears, Maria recalled something that had seemed insignificant at the time. 2 days ago, Madame Fatima mentioned that she felt like someone was watching her, Maria said, wiping her eyes with a tissue. She said it several times during the day. When I asked what she meant, she just laughed and said it was probably her imagination. This detail sent a chill through the investigation team. If Fatima had sensed surveillance, it suggested that her abduction had been planned well in advance. Someone had been studying her routines, her movements within the palace, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. The forensics team, meanwhile, had made several disturbing discoveries. Despite the appearance of chaotic destruction, the Damage to the presidential quarters showed signs of careful orchestration. Valuable items that would have been targets for common criminals were left untouched. Instead, personal items, photographs, letters, and especially anything related to Fatima's work on women's rights had been specifically targeted. Most significantly, the forensics experts found traces of a specialized sedative on Fatima's pillowcase, indicating that she had likely been drugged before being taken. This explained why there were no signs of a struggle beyond the deliberately created destruction. Whoever did this had access to military-grade sedatives, the chief forensics officer reported to Ibrahim. This wasn't a random crime. It was a professional operation. As the investigation intensified, the palace's cybersecurity team worked around the clock to analyze the digital evidence. The absence of Fatima from any security camera footage was becoming increasingly puzzling and sinister. In a building with over 200 surveillance cameras covering every corridor, entrance, and common area, it seemed impossible for a person to simply vanish without leaving a digital trace. Dr. Amadou Kone, the palace's head of information technology, had been reviewing security footage for 12 hours straight, his eyes red from staring at monitors. A former student at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology who had returned to Burkina Faso to serve his country, Dr. Kone was known for his meticulous attention to detail and his ability to uncover digital evidence that others might miss. "Mr. President," he reported, entering Ibrahim's office with a grim expression, "I've found something that you need to see." Dr. Kone set up his laptop and began playing synchronized footage from multiple cameras covering the residential wing. "This is from 2 nights ago, starting at 11:30 p.m. Watch carefully." The footage showed normal nighttime activity, security guards making their rounds, cleaning staff finishing their duties, the usual peaceful atmosphere of the palace after hours. But Dr. Kone had noticed something that others had missed. "Here, at 11:47 p.m., he said, pointing to one camera feed. "Do you see this slight distortion in camera 7? It lasts for exactly 3 minutes and 14 seconds. Ibrahim leaned forward, studying the screen. There was indeed a barely perceptible flicker in the image, as if someone had briefly interfered with the camera's signal. "Now watch camera 12, which covers the same corridor from a different angle," Dr. Kone continued. "At exactly the same time, there's an identical distortion. The pattern was subtle, but undeniable. Someone with sophisticated technical knowledge had managed to temporarily disrupt multiple camera feeds simultaneously, creating blind spots in the surveillance system without completely shutting down the cameras, which would have triggered immediate alarms. This level of technical sophistication suggests military or intelligence training," Dr. Kone concluded. "Whoever did this had intimate knowledge of our security systems and access to specialized equipment." Ibrahim's suspicions were beginning to crystallize around an uncomfortable truth. The precision of the operation, the knowledge of palace security, protocols, the access to specialized equipment, all pointed to an inside job involving someone with high-level clearance and technical expertise. "Dr. Kone, I want you to review every system access log for the past month," Ibrahim ordered. "Focus on anyone who accessed the security system configurations, camera maintenance schedules, or surveillance archives." Meanwhile, the investigation was expanding beyond the palace walls. Intelligence agencies across West Africa had been alerted to Fatima's disappearance, and Interpol had issued an international missing person alert. The possibility that she had been taken out of the country was becoming increasingly likely given the sophisticated nature of the operation. President Ibrahim had also contacted his closest international allies, including the presidents of Ghana, Senegal, and Niger. The African Union's Security Council was convened for an emergency session as the kidnapping of a sitting president's spouse represented a dangerous precedent that could destabilize the entire region. But it was a call from an unexpected source that would break open the investigation. At 3:17 a.m. on the third day after Fatima's disappearance, Ibrahim's secure phone rang with a call that would change everything. The caller identified himself only as Mikhail, claiming to represent Russian Federal Intelligence Services. His English was fluent but heavily accented, and he spoke with the measured precision of someone accustomed to dealing with classified information. "Mr. President, we need to meet immediately," Mikhail said without preamble. "We have information about your wife's situation that cannot be discussed over the phone." Ibrahim was initially skeptical. Burkina Faso had maintained generally positive relations with Russia, but they were not close allies, and Russian intelligence involvement in domestic African affairs was always viewed with suspicion. However, given the desperate circumstances and the lack of progress in the investigation, he agreed to the meeting. The rendezvous was arranged for the following evening at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. The location was chosen for its isolation and the ease with which it could be secured against surveillance. Ibrahim arrived with a minimal security detail, having ordered that the meeting be kept strictly confidential. Mikhail turned out to be a man in his 50s with steel gray hair and the alert eyes of a career intelligence officer. He was accompanied by two technical specialists who immediately began setting up sophisticated electronic equipment. "Mr. President, what I'm about to show you will be difficult to watch," Mikhail began. "But it will also provide you with the first real clues about who has taken your wife and why." The Russian team had been monitoring international communications networks as part of their global intelligence operations when they intercepted a video transmission that had been sent to Ibrahim's private phone number. However, their advanced signal analysis equipment had captured additional data that the palace's systems had missed. This video was transmitted from a server farm located in Eastern Europe, Mikhail explained, pulling up a complex digital map on his laptop screen. The signal was bounced through multiple proxy servers to disguise its origin, but we were able to trace it back to its source. The map showed a network of connections spanning from Burkina Faso to locations in Bulgaria, Romania, and ultimately to a facility in a remote area of Albania. Red dots indicated transmission points, while blue lines showed the data pathway. The organization behind this operation calls itself the New Athens Project, Mikhail continued. They present themselves as a private intelligence firm, but they are actually a shadow network that specializes in destabilizing governments that challenge Western economic interests in Africa. Ibrahim studied the information with growing anger. The idea that his wife had been kidnapped not by common criminals or even political opponents, but by an international conspiracy designed to maintain Western dominance in Africa, filled him with a rage that threatened to consume his judgment. "Why are you helping me?" Ibrahim asked. "What does Russia gain from this?" Mikhail's expression remained neutral. "Mr. President, Russia has its own interests in seeing a multipolar world where African nations can choose their own paths without coercion. The New Athens Project represents exactly the kind of neo-colonial interference that we oppose." The Russian intelligence officer then revealed information that would prove crucial to the rescue operation. Through their electronic surveillance capabilities, they had identified the approximate location where Fatima was being held, a compound in northeastern Burkina Faso, in an area that was officially uninhabited but showed signs of recent construction and activity in satellite imagery. "We believe your wife is being held in an underground facility near the village of Dori," Mikhail said, pointing to a location on a detailed topographical map. "The compound is disguised as an abandoned mining operation, but thermal imaging shows significant activity below ground." The meeting concluded with an exchange of encrypted communication devices and a promise of continued intelligence sharing. As Ibrahim prepared to leave, Mikhail offered one final piece of advice. "Mr. President, be very careful who you trust within your own government. The New Athens Project could not have succeeded without inside assistance. Someone close to you has betrayed your trust." Armed with intelligence from Russian sources, Ibrahim returned to the palace with a newfound sense of purpose, but also with a terrible certainty that someone within his inner circle had facilitated Fatima's kidnapping. The precision of the operation, the knowledge of palace security procedures, and the ability to manipulate surveillance systems all pointed to betrayal at the highest levels. Rather than immediately launching a rescue operation, Ibrahim made the difficult decision to first identify and neutralize the security breach within his own administration. He couldn't risk a rescue attempt being compromised by the same individual who had enabled the kidnapping. Working with Captain Gabriel, whom he had determined was above suspicion due to his absence from the palace during the critical period, Ibrahim devised a plan to smoke out the traitor. They would create a false operation, complete with fake intelligence about Fatima's location, and monitor who had access to this information and how it might be leaked to outside parties. The trap was elaborate and carefully constructed. Ibrahim announced to his inner circle that intelligence sources had located Fatima in a compound near the Ghanaian border and that a rescue mission would be launched within 48 hours. Only 6 people were privy to this false information: Colonel Samba, 3 deputy ministers, the palace communications director, and Captain Gabriel. Each individual was given slightly different details about the timing and approach of the fictional rescue mission. If any of these details appeared in intercepted communications, or if the kidnappers moved Fatima in response to the false intelligence, it would indicate which person had leaked the information. Meanwhile, Dr. Cohn had completed his analysis of system access logs and had made a disturbing discovery. Colonel Samba's security credentials had been used to access the surveillance system configuration files on the night before Fatima's disappearance. When confronted, the colonel claimed he had been performing routine maintenance, but the timing was suspicious. More damning evidence emerged when forensic accountants examining the colonel's financial records discovered a series of unusual cash deposits totaling nearly $50,000 over the previous 6 months. The money had been deposited in small amounts to avoid triggering automatic reporting requirements, but the pattern was unmistakable. Dr. Cohn also found evidence that someone had used the colonel's system access to install malware on the surveillance servers. This malware was designed to create temporary blind spots in camera coverage without triggering alarms, exactly the kind of sophisticated tool that would have been necessary to extract Fatima from the palace undetected. "Mr. President," Captain Gabriel reported, "we have sufficient evidence to arrest Colonel Samba. The digital forensics, financial records, and timeline all point to his involvement." Ibrahim felt a profound sense of betrayal. Colonel Samba had been more than just a security chief. He had been a trusted friend, a man who had attended Ibrahim's wedding, who had shared meals at the family table, who had helped train the next generation of Burkina Faso's military officers. The thought that such a man could be bought by foreign interests was almost too painful to contemplate. But Ibrahim was also a pragmatist. Rather than immediately arresting the colonel, he decided to use him to gather more intelligence about the New Athens project and potentially to communicate false information to the kidnappers. The trap Ibrahim had set worked with devastating effectiveness. Within hours of briefing his inner circle about the false rescue mission, intercepted communications indicated that someone was indeed passing information to external parties. The specific details that appeared in these communications matched exactly what had been told to Colonel Samba, confirming his role as the security breach. But Ibrahim wanted more than just confirmation of the colonel's treachery. He wanted to understand the full scope of the conspiracy, to learn everything possible about the New Athens project and its operations in West Africa. This meant confronting Colonel Samba directly, but in a way that might encourage him to reveal additional information. The confrontation was staged in Ibrahim's private office late at night, with only Captain Gabriel present as a witness. Ibrahim had spent hours preparing for this encounter, knowing that his own emotional state could compromise his ability to extract useful intelligence. "Colonel, please sit down," Ibrahim said calmly as Samba entered the office. "We need to discuss some irregularities that have come to our attention." The colonel's demeanor was guarded but not yet panicked. He had clearly prepared himself for the possibility of exposure, but seemed to believe he could still deceive his way out of trouble. "Of course, Mr. President. I'm at your service," Samba replied, settling into the chair across from Ibrahim's desk. Ibrahim began by presenting the financial evidence, bank records showing the suspicious deposits, timestamps that correlated with known New Athens activities in the region, and documentation of the colonel's personal expenses that far exceeded his official salary. "Can you explain these transactions, Colonel?" Ibrahim asked, keeping his voice neutral. Samba's explanation was practiced but unconvincing. He claimed the money came from legitimate investment activities, property rentals, and family gifts. But when Ibrahim pressed for documentation of these supposed income sources, the colonel became evasive. "Colonel," Ibrahim said, leaning forward, "I'm going to ask you one direct question, and I want you to consider your answer very carefully. Do you know where my wife is?" For a moment, Samba's facade cracked. Ibrahim saw fear, guilt, and resignation flash across the man's face before the mask of professional composure returned. "Sir, I have been working tirelessly to locate the first lady. The suggestion that I would be involved in her disappearance is deeply offensive." Ibrahim then played his final card. He revealed that intelligence services had traced the video transmission and identified the New Athens project, that financial forensics had uncovered the payment trail, and that digital evidence had linked Samba's system access to the security breach. "The only question now, Colonel, is whether you help us bring Fatima home safely, or whether you compound your crimes by maintaining this deception." Faced with overwhelming evidence, Colonel Samba finally broke. But rather than showing remorse or offering cooperation, he revealed a depth of cynicism and resentment that shocked Ibrahim. "You think you're building a better Burkina Faso?" Samba said with bitter laughter. "But you're just another idealistic fool who doesn't understand how the world really works. The New Athens project maintains stability. They prevent chaos. Your wife will be returned when you step down and allow someone more practical to govern." "More practical?" Ibrahim's voice rose with anger. "You mean more willing to sell out our people to foreign interests?" "I mean someone who understands that small. Countries like ours survive by accommodating larger powers, not by challenging them," Samba replied. "Your anti-corruption campaigns, your nationalist rhetoric, your refusal to grant mining concessions to European companies, all of this makes you a liability to regional stability." The conversation continued for another hour, with Ibrahim extracting additional details about New Athens operations, their funding sources, and their methods of recruiting assets within African governments. But it became clear that Colonel Samba knew only his small piece of the larger conspiracy. As dawn approached, Ibrahim faced a decision. He could arrest Samba immediately and risk alerting the New Athens operatives, potentially endangering Fatima's life. Or he could continue to use the colonel as an unwitting double agent, feeding him false information while planning a rescue operation. Ibrahim chose a third option. He decided to fake Samba's death, making it appear that the colonel had committed suicide out of guilt, while actually holding him in secret detention where he could be interrogated by experts and potentially used to communicate with his handlers. With Colonel Samba's suicide staged and his confession providing crucial intelligence about New Athens operations, Ibrahim was finally ready to launch the rescue mission. However, he knew that a conventional military operation would likely result in Fatima's death, as the kidnappers would almost certainly kill her rather than allow her to be rescued. Instead, Ibrahim approved a plan that was as audacious as it was dangerous. He would personally infiltrate the compound where Fatima was being held, disguised as a local farmer delivering supplies. This would allow him to gather real-time intelligence about the facility's layout and Fatima's exact location before a larger force moved in for extraction. The plan was developed in consultation with military advisors, intelligence specialists, and the Russian operatives who continued to provide technical support. Every detail was rehearsed multiple times with backup plans created for every conceivable contingency. Ibrahim's disguise was crafted by theatrical experts borrowed from the National Arts Institute, His appearance was altered with professional makeup, prosthetics, and clothing that would make him indistinguishable from the hundreds of subsistence farmers who lived in the rural areas surrounding the compound. "Mr. President," Captain Gabriel said as final preparations were completed, "I must once again express my strong opposition to your personal involvement in this operation. The risks are enormous, and the country cannot afford to lose both you and the First Lady." Ibrahim understood Gabriel's concerns, but he had made his decision based on both tactical and personal considerations. Tactically, his presence would provide the operation with real-time intelligence and decision-making capability that could mean the difference between success and failure. Personally, he could not bear the thought of remaining safely in the palace, while others risked their lives to save his wife. "Captain, I appreciate your concerns, but this is not negotiable," Ibrahim replied. "Fatima is in danger because of choices I made as president. I will not ask others to bear risks that I am unwilling to accept myself." The team that would accompany Ibrahim consisted of 12 specially selected soldiers, each with expertise in different aspects of the mission. They included explosives specialists, communications experts, medics, and close-quarters combat specialists. All had volunteered for the mission and understood that they might not return. The compound where Fatima was being held was located in a remote area that had been chosen specifically for its isolation from major population centers and its distance from military installations. Intelligence gathered by Russian satellites and confirmed by local informants indicated that the facility was much larger than it appeared from the surface. What looked like an abandoned mining operation actually contained an extensive underground network of tunnels and chambers. Thermal imaging suggested that at least 20 people were present at the site at any given time, including both guards and support personnel. The rescue operation began before dawn, with the team traveling in vehicles disguised as those typically used by local farmers and merchants. They approached the compound from multiple directions, with Ibrahim and 3 others posing as suppliers making a routine delivery. As Ibrahim walked toward the compound's main building, carrying sacks of grain that concealed communication equipment and weapons, he felt a mixture of terror and determination, unlike anything he had experienced during his military service or political career. This was not about national policy or strategic objectives. This was about love, family, and the most personal of commitments. The surface level of the compound was exactly as intelligence reports had described, a collection of weathered buildings and rusted mining equipment that gave the impression of long abandonment. However, Ibrahim's trained eye caught details that revealed ongoing activity: fresh tire tracks in the dust, recently disturbed earth around certain buildings, and the subtle presence of surveillance cameras disguised as broken equipment. Ibrahim and his 3 companions approached the main building, where they were met by 2 guards who appeared to be expecting them. The guards were clearly professionals. Their casual demeanor couldn't hide the alert way they scanned the approaching farmers, and Ibrahim noticed the concealed weapons beneath their loose clothing. "You're early today," one of the guards commented in the local dialect, testing whether the farmers were genuine locals. "The roads were clear, so we made good time," Ibrahim replied, using the accent and speech patterns he had practiced for hours. "Same order as always: grain, cooking oil, and medical supplies." The guard nodded and gestured for them to follow him into the building. Once inside, Ibrahim was struck by the contrast between the dilapidated exterior and the surprisingly modern interior. The building had been gutted and converted into what was essentially an elevator shaft leading deep underground. As they descended in a freight elevator, Ibrahim counted the levels. The elevator stopped at the 4th sublevel, approximately 50 feet below ground. The doors opened to reveal a sight that confirmed their worst fears about the scope and sophistication of the New Athens operation. The underground facility was a marvel of engineering and security. Concrete corridors stretched in multiple directions, lit by modern LED fixtures and monitored by an extensive network of surveillance cameras. The air circulation system kept the atmosphere comfortable despite the depth, and generators hummed quietly in the background, providing reliable power. Ibrahim and his team were escorted to a storage area where they began unloading their supplies, all the while memorizing the layout and noting the positions of guards and security measures. Through careful observation, Ibrahim identified what appeared to be a heavily guarded section of the facility that likely contained the detention areas. But it was the discovery of a detailed facility map posted on a wall in the storage area that provided the breakthrough they needed. While pretending to rest between trips to their vehicle, Ibrahim memorized the layout, noting the locations of detention cells, guard stations, communications centers, and emergency exits. The map revealed that the facility contained 3 levels of detention areas, with the highest security prisoners held on the lowest level. Given Fatima's high profile, Ibrahim reasoned that she would be held in the most secure section, which was located at the far end of the facility and accessed through multiple security checkpoints. As the supply delivery neared completion, Ibrahim made a decision that terrified his companions, but which he deemed necessary for the success of the overall mission. He would remain behind in the facility, hidden among the supplies, while his 3 companions returned to the surface to provide intelligence for the main assault force. "Sir, this is madness," whispered Sergeant Ouedraogo, one of the soldiers, accompanying him. "If you're discovered, the entire mission fails. If we don't get precise intelligence about Fatima's location, the assault force could search for hours while the enemy escapes or kills her," Ibrahim replied. "I'm staying. That's an order." Hidden in a storage closet filled with cleaning supplies, Ibrahim waited for nightfall and the change of guard shifts that would provide his best opportunity to search for Fatima. The facility operated on a strict schedule, with most activity concentrated during daylight hours and a reduced security presence at night. Using intelligence gathered from Colonel Samba's interrogation and the facility map he had memorized, Ibrahim understood that the New Athens operatives were confident in their security measures. They relied primarily on the facility's hidden location and sophisticated access controls rather than overwhelming numbers of guards. At approximately 2 a.m., when the facility had settled into its overnight routine, Ibrahim carefully emerged from his hiding place. Dressed now in maintenance worker coveralls that he had found in the storage closet, he began moving through the corridors with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged there. The facility's night lighting was dimmed but adequate for navigation. Ibrahim moved systematically through each level, avoiding the main guard stations while searching for any sign of where Fatima might be held. The deeper he went into the facility, the more his anger grew at the casual efficiency with which these criminals had organized their operation. On the 3rd sub-level, Ibrahim encountered his first real challenge. A guard was conducting a routine patrol, checking locks and surveillance monitors. Ibrahim pressed himself against the wall in an alcove, controlling his breathing and praying that his maintenance worker disguise would be sufficient if he were spotted. The guard passed within feet of Ibrahim's hiding place, so close that Ibrahim could have reached out and touched him. But the man continued his patrol without detecting Ibrahim's presence, his footsteps gradually fading as he moved toward the far end of the corridor. Ibrahim waited several minutes before continuing his search, moving deeper into the facility's most secure areas. The architecture here was different: reinforced concrete walls, steel doors with electronic locks, and a pervasive sense of isolation that spoke to the facility's true purpose as a detention center. It was on the 4th sublevel that Ibrahim finally found what he was looking for. Through a small window in a heavy steel door, he caught sight of a figure that made his heart race with a mixture of relief and rage. Fatima sat on a narrow cot, her back to the door, but her distinctive posture and the way she held her shoulders were unmistakable. She appeared to be alive and relatively unharmed, though her clothes were dirty and her usually immaculate appearance showed the effects of her captivity. Ibrahim's hands trembled as he tried the door handle, finding it locked with what appeared to be an electronic security system. Fatima, he whispered through the small window, keeping his voice barely audible. She turned at the sound, her eyes widening with disbelief and hope when she saw his face. Tears began streaming down her cheeks as she moved quickly to the door. "Ibrahim? How did you find me?" she whispered back, placing her hand against the glass that separated them. "I promised I would come for you," he replied, studying her face, for signs of injury or trauma. "Are you hurt? Have they—" "I'm alive," she interrupted, understanding his concern. "They've kept me isolated but haven't physically harmed me. But Ibrahim, this is bigger than just me. I've heard things, learned things about their organization. They're planning operations across West Africa." Ibrahim's tactical mind was already working on the problem of getting her out of the cell. The electronic lock was sophisticated, requiring either a key card or a numeric code. He had neither, but he did have explosives concealed in his equipment. "I need you to move to the far corner of the cell and cover yourself with the mattress," he instructed. "I'm going to blow the lock." "The explosion will alert the entire facility," Fatima warned. "I know, but the assault team is already in position. Once I get you out, we'll have maybe 10 minutes before this place is overrun with our people." Ibrahim carefully placed a small explosive charge on the door's locking mechanism, using techniques he had learned during his military training years earlier. The explosion would be contained and directional, designed to destroy the lock without causing structural damage that might trap them. "Ready?" he asked, and Fatima nodded from her protected position. The explosion was louder than Ibrahim had hoped, echoing through the concrete corridors like thunder. Alarms immediately began wailing throughout the facility, and he could hear shouts and running footsteps as guards rushed to respond to the security breach. The cell door swung open, and Ibrahim rushed inside to embrace his wife. For a moment, the danger and urgency of their situation faded as they held each other, confirming that they were both real, both alive, both still fighting. "We need to go," Ibrahim said, reluctantly breaking their embrace. "The extraction point is 3 levels up, but we'll have to fight our way out." As they moved into the corridor, the facility's emergency lighting activated, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. The sound of boots on concrete grew closer, and Ibrahim knew they had only minutes before armed guards would be swarming their location. The underground facility had transformed from a place of hidden captivity into a battlefield. Emergency sirens wailed continuously, red warning lights flashed at every intersection, and the sound of shouting voices and running feet echoed through the concrete corridors. Ibrahim and Fatima moved quickly but carefully, using the facility's own layout against the guards, who were presumably more familiar with its normal operations than its emergency procedures. Ibrahim had memorized the facility map during his earlier reconnaissance, but navigating while under pursuit and in emergency lighting conditions proved more challenging than he had anticipated. Fatima, despite her weeks of captivity, proved to be remarkably resilient and alert, following his lead without question and moving with a quiet determination that reminded him why he had fallen in love with her strength and courage. "This way," Ibrahim whispered, guiding her down a maintenance corridor that should bypass the main security checkpoint on the 3rd level. They could hear guards moving through the parallel corridors, their radio communications crackling with urgent reports about the security breach. As they approached a junction where the maintenance corridor met one of the main passages, Ibrahim held up his hand for Fatima to stop. Voices were approaching from ahead, at least 2 guards, possibly 3, moving in their direction with the systematic precision of a search pattern. Ibrahim drew the pistol he had concealed beneath his maintenance coveralls, checking to ensure it was ready for use. He had hoped to avoid a firefight, knowing that gunshots would immediately reveal their location to every guard in the facility, but their options were rapidly diminishing. The first guard appeared at the corridor junction, his assault rifle raised and ready. Ibrahim's military training took over, and he fired twice in quick succession, the shots echoing through the concrete space like cannon fire. The guard dropped immediately, but his partner was already responding, diving for cover and returning. "Fire! Stay down!" Ibrahim shouted to Fatima as bullets sparked off the concrete walls around them. The confined space of the underground corridors turned the gunfight into a deadly echo chamber, with muzzle flashes illuminating the scene like strobe lights. Ibrahim moved tactically, using the corridor's architectural features for cover while advancing toward the enemy position. His years of military experience served him well, as he was able to outflank the remaining guards and neutralize them with precise fire. "Are you injured?" he asked Fatima as the immediate gunfight ended. "No, but they'll know exactly where we are now," she replied, her voice steadied despite the terrifying circumstances. She was right. Within moments, they could hear reinforcements converging on their location from multiple directions. The facility's security force was responding with professional efficiency, attempting to contain and capture them before they could reach an exit. Ibrahim made a tactical decision that went against every instinct for personal safety he possessed. Instead of trying to sneak through the facility's corridors, they would move quickly and decisively toward the main elevator, fighting their way through any opposition they encountered. "We're going to run," he told Fatima. "Stay behind me, but stay close. If I fall, keep moving toward the elevator. The assault team will be coming down to meet us." They began moving rapidly through the corridors, Ibrahim leading with his weapon, ready, while Fatima followed closely behind. The facility's layout worked in their favor, as the emergency lighting and alarm systems created confusion that masked their movement to some degree. But their luck couldn't hold indefinitely. As they approached the main corridor leading to the elevator shaft, they found themselves facing a coordinated response from the facility's security force. Guards had established defensive positions at key choke points, creating overlapping fields of fire that would make advancing extremely dangerous. "Mr. President," a voice called out in heavily accented English, "you are surrounded. Release the woman and surrender, and you will not be harmed." Ibrahim recognized the voice of the New Athens operative who had appeared in the video demanding his resignation. The man was somewhere ahead of them in the maze of corridors, using the facility's public address system to communicate. "You have nowhere to run," the voice continued. "The facility is sealed, and your assault team will find only empty buildings on the surface. Surrender now, and your wife will be returned to you unharmed." Ibrahim knew this was likely a lie. The New Athens project had already demonstrated their willingness to kill, and they had too much invested in this operation to simply release their captives without achieving their political objectives. Instead of responding to the demands, Ibrahim activated the emergency communication device that connected him directly to the assault team waiting above. "Thunder Dawn, this is Eagle," he transmitted. "We are 3 levels down and under heavy fire. Begin descent immediately." The response was immediate and reassuring. "Eagle, this is Thunder Dawn Actual. We are at the elevator and beginning descent. Hold your position." The sound of the freight elevator descending was audible throughout the facility, a mechanical grinding that announced the arrival of Ibrahim's rescue force. The New Athens guards, who had been confident in their defensive positions, suddenly found themselves facing a two-front battle as elite Burkina Faso special forces began emerging from the elevator shaft. Captain Gabriel's voice crackled through Ibrahim's radio. "Sir, we have 12 operators on level 2 and are advancing toward your position. Can you provide a status report?" "We are mobile on level 4, moving toward the main corridor," Ibrahim responded while guiding Fatima through a complex series of maintenance passages he had identified during his earlier reconnaissance. "Enemy forces are concentrated at grid, references Charlie 7 and Delta 9. The tactical situation was evolving rapidly. The facility's defenders, who had been trained for security operations rather than military combat, found themselves outmatched by soldiers who had spent years training for exactly this type of close-quarters battle. The sound of systematic gunfire echoed through the corridors as the assault team advanced through the facility with professional precision. Ibrahim and Fatima reached a service ladder that connected to level 3, providing them with an alternate route that would bypass the heaviest fighting. As they climbed, Ibrahim could hear the battle intensifying below them, with the distinctive sound of flashbang grenades and the controlled bursts of automatic weapons fire. "The facility has multiple exit routes," Fatima said as they climbed. "I overheard the guards talking about escape tunnels that lead to different points on the surface. If their leadership escapes, they might try to activate other cells." This intelligence was crucial. Ibrahim immediately radioed the information to Captain Gabriel, who could coordinate with surface forces to seal off the alternate exits. The New Athens project's regional leadership might be present in the facility, and capturing them would be worth the additional risk. As they reached Level 3, Ibrahim and Fatima found themselves in the middle of the battle zone. Assault team members were advancing methodically through the corridors, clearing each room and securing each intersection with the efficiency that came from extensive training and combat experience. "Mr. President," Sergeant Uedraogo called out, as he spotted them emerging from the service access. "We have a clear route to the elevator. We can have you topside in 5 minutes." But Ibrahim was not ready to leave. The facility contained intelligence that could reveal the full scope of New Athens operations across West Africa. Computer servers, communication equipment, documents, and potentially other prisoners. All of this represented an intelligence windfall that could prevent future operations against African governments. "Sergeant, I want this facility completely secured," Ibrahim ordered. "No one leaves without being questioned. Every computer, every file, every piece of equipment gets collected for analysis." "Sir, with respect, our mission is to extract you and the First Lady," Sergeant Uedraogo replied. "We can come back with a larger force for intelligence collection." "By then, they'll have destroyed everything," Ibrahim countered. "This is our one opportunity to understand how they operate, who they're working with, and what other operations they have planned." The debate was resolved by an explosion from deeper in the facility. One of the New Athens operatives had detonated what appeared to be a document destruction device, sending smoke billowing through the corridors and triggering additional fire suppression systems. "They're destroying evidence," Fatima observed. "We need to get to their command center before they can wipe everything." Captain Gabriel's voice came through the radio with urgency. "Sir, we've located what appears to be the facility's command center, but it's heavily defended, and they appear to be conducting some kind of data purge. We need guidance on how to proceed." Ibrahim made another decision that his security advisors would later criticize as reckless, but which proved strategically brilliant. He would personally lead the assault on the command center, using his presence to motivate the assault team and his authority to make real-time decisions about what intelligence to prioritize. The facility's command center was located at the deepest level of the underground complex, behind multiple security doors and protected by the most sophisticated defensive systems the New Athens project could deploy. As Ibrahim and the assault team approached, they could see evidence of desperate activity. Smoke from burning documents, the sound of computers being physically destroyed, and the voices of people shouting instructions in multiple languages. Captain Gabriel had positioned his forces in a tactical formation that surrounded the command center while maintaining escape routes for their own withdrawal if necessary. The New Athens defenders had fortified their position, but were clearly more focused on destroying evidence than on conducting an effective defense. "Can we cut the power to their data destruction equipment?" Ibrahim asked Dr. Cohn, who had accompanied the assault team, to provide technical expertise. "Not without risking damage to the very systems we want to preserve," Dr. Cohn replied. "But I might be able to access their network remotely if we can get close enough to their wireless access points." The solution came from an unexpected source. Fatima, who had been quietly observing the situation, pointed out that the command center's ventilation system connected to the maintenance areas she had observed during her captivity. "There's a service tunnel that runs above the command center," she explained. "I could see maintenance workers accessing it from the cell where they kept me. If someone could get into that tunnel, they might be able to access the computer systems directly." The plan was dangerous and required precise timing, but it offered the best chance of preserving the intelligence that was rapidly being destroyed. While the assault team maintained pressure on the command center's main defenses, a small technical team led by Dr. Cohn would infiltrate through the service tunnel and attempt to physically access the computer systems before they could be completely wiped. Ibrahim insisted on being part of the infiltration team, despite strong objections from his security personnel. As president, he argued, he was the only person present with the authority to make instant decisions about what information to preserve and what operations to prioritize based on what they discovered. The service tunnel was exactly as Fatima had described, a narrow maintenance passage that provided access to electrical and ventilation systems throughout the facility. Crawling through the confined space while carrying technical equipment and weapons was exhausting and claustrophobic, but it provided them with access to the command center that the defenders had not anticipated. Dr. Cohn worked with practiced efficiency, connecting his equipment to the facility's network infrastructure and beginning the process of copying data even as it was being deleted by the New Athens operatives below. The race against time was intense. Gigabytes of intelligence were being preserved even as other files were being permanently destroyed. I'm seeing financial records, personnel files, operational plans for multiple African countries, Dr. Cohn reported through his headset. There are also communication logs that show coordination with government officials in several Western nations. This intelligence was exactly what Ibrahim had hoped to find, evidence that could expose not just the New Athens Project's operations in Burkina Faso, but their broader conspiracy to influence African politics through intimidation and violence. The situation in the command center below was becoming increasingly desperate. The New Athens operatives had realized that their data was being accessed from outside their secure perimeter, and they were now focused on completely destroying their computer systems rather than just deleting files. We need to end this now, Ibrahim decided. Can you download their core database? I'm trying, but they're physically destroying hardware faster than I can copy data, Dr. Cohn replied, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked frantically with his equipment. Ibrahim made another split-second decision. He would drop down into the command center through the service tunnel, creating enough confusion and disruption to buy Dr. Cohn the additional time needed to complete the data recovery. Ibrahim's entry into the command center was dramatic and completely unexpected. One moment, the New Athens operatives were focused on destroying evidence and fighting off the assault team's frontal attack. The next moment, the president of Burkina Faso dropped through a ceiling panel directly into their midst. The shock value of his appearance bought Ibrahim crucial seconds. The room contained 6 operatives, 3 working frantically at computer terminals, 2 maintaining defensive positions at the main entrance, and 1 who appeared to be the facility commander, directing the evidence destruction efforts. Ibrahim recognized the commander immediately. This was the man who had appeared in the video threatening Fatima's life, the same voice that had demanded his resignation in exchange for her safe return. Seeing him in person, Ibrahim felt a surge of rage that temporarily overrode his tactical training. You, Ibrahim said, raising his weapon to cover the room while Captain Gabriel's forces breached the main entrance. You threatened my wife. You terrorized my family. The man, who appeared to be in his 50s with the bearing of a professional soldier, showed no sign of fear or remorse. President Traoré, he replied in English with a slight Eastern European accent. You should have accepted our offer. Now you have simply delayed the inevitable. The tactical situation was now completely in favor of Ibrahim's forces. The New Athens operatives were surrounded, outnumbered, and outgunned. But the intelligence operation was still racing against time as Dr. Cohn continued his data recovery efforts. Who do you work for? Ibrahim demanded, though he kept his weapon trained on the commander while Captain Gabriel's team secured the other operatives. You think this is about individuals? The commander replied with a laugh that held no humor. This is about maintaining order, preventing chaos, ensuring that Africa remains stable and productive. Your nationalist ideologies threaten the economic relationships that have kept this continent from descending into complete anarchy. Ibrahim was struck by the casual arrogance of the man's worldview. The New Athens Project genuinely believed they were providing a service by preventing African self-determination, by ensuring that governments remained dependent on and subservient to external powers. And you thought kidnapping my wife would convince me to abandon my principles? Ibrahim asked. We thought you cared more about your family than about your political posturing, the commander replied. Most men do. Most men understand that the safety of their loved ones is worth more than abstract ideological principles. Most men aren't presidents, Ibrahim responded. Most men don't have the responsibility to protect millions of people from exactly the kind of exploitation you represent. Dr. Cohn's voice crackled through the radio. Sir, I've recovered approximately 60% of their database. Financial records, communication logs, personnel files, and operational plans for multiple countries. But they're initiating some kind of final destruction protocol. Ibrahim looked around the command center, noting the sophisticated equipment that had been used to coordinate operations across West Africa. This single facility represented years of investment and planning by the New Athens Project, and its capture would be a significant blow to their capabilities. But the commander's next words sent a chill through Ibrahim's heart. You think this is over? This is one facility among dozens. The project operates across 3 continents. You may have saved your wife, President Traoré, but you have made yourself and your government permanent enemies of forces that can reach anywhere in the world. The threat was clear and credible. By successfully rescuing Fatima and exposing the New Athens Project's operations, Ibrahim had not ended the conspiracy. He had escalated it to a new level of international significance. The data recovered from the New Athens Command Center proved to be even more valuable than Ibrahim had hoped. Over the following days, as intelligence analysts pored through the files Dr. Cohn had rescued, a picture emerged of a conspiracy that extended far beyond Burkina Faso and involved networks of corruption, influence, and intimidation across multiple continents. The financial records revealed funding sources that implicated major corporations, government agencies, and private foundations in the project's activities. The operational plans showed similar campaigns of intimidation being conducted against leaders in Ghana, Mali, Niger, and other African nations that had shown independence from traditional post-colonial relationships. Most damaging were the communication logs, which documented direct coordination between New Athens operatives and officials in several European governments. The project was not just a private criminal enterprise. It was a tool of state policy designed to maintain Western influence in Africa through covert means. Mr. President, Dr. Cohn reported during a classified briefing, we have evidence of direct funding from at least 4 European intelligence services, 12 multinational corporations, and a network of private foundations that appear to exist solely to launder money for these operations. Ibrahim studied the evidence with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. The intelligence windfall would allow them to expose the conspiracy and potentially prevent similar operations against other African governments. But it also confirmed that they had made powerful enemies who would not simply abandon their objectives because one operation had failed. Fatima, who had been debriefed extensively about her observations during captivity, provided additional context that helped analysts understand the intelligence they had recovered. Her memory for details and her ability to correlate overheard conversations with specific operational plans proved invaluable in piecing together the full scope of the conspiracy. They spoke about me as if I were just a tool, she told the intelligence team during one of her debriefing sessions. A means to an end, with no consideration that I was a human being with my own thoughts and observations. Their arrogance made them careless, and that carelessness is what allowed me to learn so much about their operations. The intelligence also revealed the identity of other assets that the New Athens Project had recruited within various African governments. The network of corruption was extensive, involving ministers, military officers, intelligence officials, and even some heads of state who had been compromised through various forms of pressure and incentives. Captain Gabriel, who had been promoted to head a new counterintelligence division created specifically to deal with threats like the New Athens Project, was tasked with sharing this intelligence with allied governments while maintaining operational security about sources and methods. "Sir, we have enough evidence to expose this conspiracy at the international level," Captain Gabriel reported. "The United Nations, the African Union, and even sympathetic governments in Europe and America could use this information to take action against the networks we've identified." But Ibrahim was thinking strategically about how to use the intelligence for maximum effect. Simply releasing all the information at once might result in some prosecutions and diplomatic protests, but it would also alert other similar networks to change their methods and hide their activities more effectively. Instead, he decided to use the intelligence in a coordinated campaign that would systematically dismantle the New Athens Project's capabilities while building international support for stronger protections of African sovereignty. This would require patience, careful coordination with allies, and a willingness to play a long-term strategic game against opponents who had been operating in the shadows for decades. The decision to share intelligence about the New Athens Project with international partners required careful consideration of which governments and organizations could be trusted with such sensitive information. Ibrahim knew that some of the same institutions that officially supported African development and sovereignty might have unofficial connections to the networks he was attempting to expose. The breakthrough came through Burkina Faso's growing relationship with Russia, which had provided crucial intelligence support during the rescue operation. Russian President Vladimir Putin personally guaranteed that any intelligence shared would be used to support African independence rather than to further Russian interests at the expense of African sovereignty. President Traoré, Putin said during a secure video conference, "Russia has its own experience with Western intelligence networks attempting to influence our domestic politics. We understand the threat you are facing, and we are prepared to provide substantial support in countering it." This support took multiple forms. Russian intelligence services shared their own files on New Athens Project activities, revealing that the network had also been operating against Russian interests in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Russian technical experts provided advanced counter-surveillance equipment to help protect other African leaders who might be targeted. Most importantly, Russia used its position on the United Nations Security Council to demand international investigations into the networks of foreign interference revealed by the Burkina Faso intelligence. The African Union response was swift and coordinated. An emergency summit was convened in Addis Ababa, where Ibrahim presented evidence of the conspiracy to his fellow heads of state. The reaction was a mixture of outrage, concern, and recognition. Many leaders had experienced similar forms of pressure and intimidation, but had not understood the coordinated nature of these activities. "This is not just about Burkina Faso," Ibrahim told the assembled leaders. "This is about the fundamental right of African peoples to choose their own governments and determine their own futures without foreign interference." The New Athens Project represents exactly the kind of neo-colonial control that our independence movements fought to overcome. The summit resulted in the creation of an African Intelligence Coordination Center headquartered in Ouagadougou and tasked with sharing information about foreign interference operations throughout the continent. The center would also coordinate responses to such operations, ensuring that no African government would have to face these threats alone. European reactions were more complex. Official government responses condemned the activities revealed in the intelligence. But several European leaders privately warned Ibrahim that exposing these networks might have unintended consequences for African-European relationships. President Traoré, the French foreign minister, said during a private meeting, "We understand your concerns, but these intelligence operations exist within a broader context of global stability and economic relationships. Perhaps it would be better to address these issues through diplomatic channels rather than public exposure. Ibrahim's response was polite but firm. Minister, the sovereignty of African nations is not negotiable. We will not accept foreign interference in our domestic affairs, regardless of the supposed justifications or the economic relationships involved. The American response was perhaps the most significant, as it revealed divisions within the U.S. government about how to address the revelations. The State Department officially condemned the New Athens Project's activities and promised full cooperation with any international investigations. However, intelligence sources suggested that some elements within the U.S. national security establishment had been aware of and potentially supportive of certain aspects of the project's work. While Ibrahim navigated the complex international implications of their discovery, Fatima was undergoing her own transformation in response to the trauma and insights of her captivity. The experience had revealed strengths she didn't know she possessed, but it had also left her with a deep understanding of the vulnerabilities faced by women in positions of political influence. I was targeted because they saw me as Ibrahim's weakness, she told a gathering of African women's organizations. They believed that by threatening me, they could control him. What they didn't understand is that African women are not weak links in the chain of leadership. We are sources of strength and resilience. Fatima's public appearances following her rescue were carefully managed to ensure her safety, but her message was clear and powerful. She spoke about the systematic way that women in political families were targeted by groups like the New Athens Project, and she called for international protections for the families of political leaders who chose to challenge external pressures. Her foundation, originally focused on women's education and rights, evolved into a continental network providing security consultation and support for women in political families across Africa. The Foundation's work was funded partly by assets seized from New Athens Project operations, creating a fitting irony where the conspiracy's own resources were used to protect its potential future victims. They tried to make me a victim, Fatima said in an interview with international media. Instead, they created an advocate. Every woman they threaten, every family they target, only strengthens our resolve to build systems that protect democracy and human dignity. Her relationship with Ibrahim had also evolved through the shared trauma and triumph. They spoke more openly about the risks and responsibilities of leadership, and they developed new protocols for balancing family security with the accessibility that was essential to Ibrahim's style of governance. We learned that love and leadership are not contradictory, Ibrahim reflected during a joint interview. My love for Fatima motivated me to take risks that I might not have taken for abstract political principles. But her strength and courage during captivity reminded me why those principles are worth defending. The couple also began working together more closely on policy initiatives, with Fatima taking a more visible role in international diplomacy and women's rights advocacy. Her unique experience as a survivor of political intimidation gave her credibility with international audiences that complemented Ibrahim's reputation as a champion of African sovereignty. The intelligence recovered from the New Athens Project facility provided the foundation for a multi-year campaign to expose and dismantle networks of foreign interference throughout Africa. Ibrahim understood that this would be a marathon rather than a sprint, requiring sustained effort and careful coordination with allies across the continent and around the world. The first phase involved sharing intelligence with governments that had been targeted by similar operations. This led to arrests and prosecutions in several countries, as well as the exposure of corruption networks that had been operating for decades. The revelations also prompted several African governments to reassess their relationships with international partners and to demand greater transparency in aid and investment relationships. The second phase involved building international legal frameworks to address foreign interference operations. Working with the African Union, the the United Nations, and sympathetic governments worldwide, Ibrahim helped develop new international agreements that defined political kidnapping and intimidation as forms of terrorism subject to universal jurisdiction. We cannot allow networks like the New Athens Project to operate with impunity, Ibrahim argued before the UN General Assembly. When foreign actors use violence and intimidation to influence domestic politics, they are attacking the fundamental principles of sovereignty and self-determination that form the foundation of international law. The third phase was perhaps the most important: building African capabilities to detect, prevent, and respond to future operations. The African Intelligence Coordination Center became a model for South-South cooperation, sharing not just intelligence but also training, technical capabilities, and best practices for protecting democratic governments from external manipulation. Captain Gabriel, now promoted to general and serving as the center's first director, oversaw the development of a continental early warning system that could identify patterns of foreign interference before they escalated to the level of violence that had been used against Fatima. We learned from the Burkina Faso case that these operations follow predictable patterns, General Gabriel explained to a conference of African security officials. They begin with intelligence gathering, move to influence operations, escalate to intimidation, and finally resort to violence if other methods fail. By identifying these patterns early, we can intervene before situations reach crisis levels. The center's first major success came when it detected and prevented a similar operation targeting the president of Ghana. Intelligence analysis revealed communication patterns and financial flows that matched the New Athens Project's methods, allowing Ghanaian authorities to arrest the operatives before they could execute their plan. The exposure of the New Athens Project had implications that extended far beyond Africa. Intelligence shared with allied governments revealed that similar networks were operating in Eastern Europe, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, targeting any leaders or governments that challenged established patterns of international relationships. The revelations prompted a broader international conversation about the ethics and legality of covert influence operations, particularly those that involved violence or intimidation against civilian targets. Several European parliaments held hearings examining their government's relationships with private intelligence contractors, and new oversight mechanisms were established to prevent official resources from being used to support such operations. In the United States, congressional investigations revealed that while the U.S. government had not directly funded the New Athens Project, several American corporations and foundations had provided financial support, sometimes without full knowledge of how their money was being used. This led to new regulations requiring greater transparency in international philanthropic and development activities. The Burkina Faso revelations have opened our eyes to networks of interference that operate in the shadows of international relations, Senator Elizabeth Warren said during congressional hearings on the matter. We must ensure that American resources are never again used to undermine the democratic aspirations of people around the world. The revelations also had significant economic implications. Several multinational corporations found themselves under investigation for their connections to New Athens Project operations, and stock prices fluctuated as investors tried to assess their exposure to legal and reputational risks. More broadly, the case began to change international discourse about sovereignty and interference. The traditional view that major powers had legitimate interests in influencing smaller nations' policies was increasingly challenged by arguments that such influence, particularly when it involved coercion or violence, violated fundamental principles of international law. The New Athens Project represents the privatization of colonialism, argued Dr. Amina Kohn, a scholar of international relations at the University of Ghana. Instead of direct political control, we now see networks of corporations, foundations, and private contractors working to maintain the same patterns of dominance and exploitation that formal colonialism once provided. Despite the success of their campaign against the New Athens Project, Ibrahim and Fatima both bore lasting scars from their experience. The trauma of the kidnapping, the violence of the rescue operation, and the ongoing security concerns that came with challenging, powerful international networks all took their toll on the couple and their relationship. Fatima experienced periodic anxiety attacks and nightmares related to her captivity. She worked with counselors and support groups, but the memories of isolation and fear remained vivid and troubling. The knowledge that similar networks continued to operate around the world created a constant underlying tension in her daily life. I know intellectually that we have better security now, that we understand the threats better, that we have allies who will help us, she told Ibrahim during one of their private conversations. But emotionally, there's always a part of me that's waiting for the next attack, the next crisis. Ibrahim struggled with his own form of post-traumatic stress related to the responsibility he felt for Fatima's suffering. As president, he had made decisions that put his family at risk, and while he believed those decisions were necessary for the greater good, the personal cost was often overwhelming. I signed up to take risks for my principles, he reflected. But I never fully considered that those risks would extend to you, that your safety would become a weapon that our enemies could use against everything we're trying to build. Their relationship had grown stronger through the shared ordeal, but it had also become more complex. They were no longer just husband and wife, or even just president and first lady. They had become partners in a struggle that extended far beyond Burkina Faso's borders and would likely continue for the rest of their lives. The couple developed new routines and protocols that balanced security concerns with their desire to maintain close connections to the people they served. Public appearances were more carefully planned and secured, but they remained frequent and accessible. Family time was more precious and protected, but it was also shadowed by the knowledge that their privacy had been permanently compromised. We learned that there are prices to pay for standing up to powerful interests, Ibrahim said in a retrospective interview years later. But we also learned that those prices are worth paying if the alternative is accepting injustice and exploitation. Their children, who had been shielded from much of the immediate crisis, gradually learned about the threats their parents faced and the reasons why their family lived with constant security precautions. This knowledge brought its own challenges and responsibilities, as the next generation of the family had to decide how they would carry forward the principles their parents had fought to defend. 5 years after the Ouagadougou conspiracy, the broader campaign against networks of foreign interference had achieved significant successes, but the work remained far from complete. The New Athens Project itself had been largely dismantled, with its leadership arrested or dispersed, and its funding sources exposed and shut down. However, intelligence indicated that similar networks continued to operate under different names and with evolved methods. The African Intelligence Coordination Center had grown into one of the continent's most respected institutions, with partnerships extending to similar organizations in other regions. The early warning systems developed in response to the Burkina Faso case had prevented dozens of operations targeting African leaders, and the legal frameworks established through international cooperation had resulted in prosecutions in multiple countries. We changed the game, General Gabriel reflected during the center's 5th anniversary celebration. Foreign interference in African affairs is no longer cost-free and risk-free. Networks that once operated in complete secrecy now know they face capable opponents who will expose them and hold them accountable. Ibrahim's presidency had been transformed by the experience. His international reputation as a champion of African sovereignty had been solidified, but more importantly, his approach to governance had evolved to incorporate the hard-won lessons about the nature of modern threats to democratic leadership. Leadership in the 21st century requires understanding that the battlefield extends far beyond traditional politics, Ibrahim observed during a speech at the African Union headquarters. Our enemies don't always wear uniforms or represent official governments. Sometimes they operate through networks of private contractors, multinational corporations, and shadow organizations that profit from instability and dependence. The economic impact of Ibrahim's confrontation with foreign interference had been largely positive for Burkina Faso. International investors, rather than being deterred by the security challenges, had been impressed by the government's competence and determination in handling the crisis. Foreign direct investment had increased substantially, and several major development projects had been launched with partners who appreciated working with a government that had proven its ability to protect its sovereignty. The success had also strengthened Ibrahim's domestic political position. Public approval ratings, already high before the crisis, had reached unprecedented levels as Burkinabe citizens took pride in their president's refusal to be intimidated by foreign pressure. The rescue operation had become the subject of films, books, and songs that celebrated both Ibrahim's courage and Fatima's resilience. However, Ibrahim remained acutely aware that the threats they had confronted were part of larger patterns of global power and economic relationships that could not be changed by a single successful operation. The work of building sustainable protections for African sovereignty would require generations of sustained effort and would face constant evolution in the methods used by those who sought to maintain systems of dominance and exploitation. As the immediate aftermath of the Ouagadougou conspiracy settled into history, Ibrahim and Fatima began focusing on ensuring that the lessons learned would be passed on to future generations of African leaders. This involved not just documenting their experiences, but also building institutions and training programs that would prepare others to face similar challenges. The African Leadership Institute, established with funding from Seized New Athens, Project Assets, became a premier training center for emerging political leaders throughout the continent. The curriculum included traditional subjects like economics, law, and public administration, but also specialized training in counterintelligence, digital security, and crisis management. We cannot assume that future leaders will face the same threats we encountered, Fatima explained to the Institute's first graduating class. But we can ensure they have the tools and knowledge to adapt to whatever challenges emerge. The price of sovereignty is eternal vigilance, and vigilance requires both courage and competence. The Institute also became a research center for studying patterns of foreign interference and developing countermeasures. Its publications became required reading for security officials throughout Africa, and its recommendations influenced policy decisions in dozens of countries. Ibrahim and Fatima's own children, now old enough to understand the full scope of what their parents had experienced, made their own decisions about how to carry forward the family's commitment to African independence and development. Their eldest son chose to study international law, focusing on developing legal frameworks for protecting sovereignty in an interconnected world. Their daughter pursued journalism, determined to expose corruption and foreign interference through investigative reporting. They understand that they have inherited both opportunities and responsibilities, Ibrahim reflected. Growing up in a family that has challenged powerful interests means they will always face scrutiny and potential threats. But it also means they have unique insights into how systems of power operate and can be changed. The family's security arrangements had evolved to provide protection while allowing the children to have as normal a life as possible. They attended local schools, participated in community activities, and maintained friendships with peers from all social backgrounds. But they also received specialized training in personal security and were educated about the political context that shaped their lives. The 5th anniversary of Fatima's rescue brought international recognition that extended far beyond Africa. The United Nations awarded both Ibrahim and Fatima its highest honors for their contributions to peace and human rights. The European Parliament, despite the involvement of some European actors in the New Athens project, passed a resolution condemning foreign interference operations and praising the Burkina Faso government's response to the crisis. Most significantly, the case became a studied example in international relations programs around the world. Universities in Europe, America, Asia, and Africa included the Ouagadougou conspiracy in their curricula as an example of how small nations could successfully challenge powerful networks of foreign interference. What President and Mrs. Traoré accomplished goes beyond the rescue of a kidnapped spouse, wrote Professor Sarah Johnson of the London School of Economics in her definitive study of the case. They demonstrated that sophisticated networks of coercion and influence could be exposed and defeated through strategic thinking, international cooperation, and unwavering commitment to democratic principles. The international recognition brought new responsibilities. Ibrahim found himself frequently invited to consult with other governments facing similar challenges, while Fatima became a sought-after speaker on issues of political resilience and women's rights. Their experiences informed policy decisions in countries ranging from Latin America to Southeast Asia. However, both remained focused primarily on their responsibilities to Burkina Faso and to the broader African community. Ibrahim's presidency entered its second term with a mandate to continue the economic and social development programs that had been partially overshadowed by the security crisis. Fatima's foundation expanded its work throughout the continent while maintaining its headquarters in Ouagadougou. Success brings its own challenges, Fatima observed during an interview marking the anniversary. International attention and recognition are gratifying, but they also create expectations and pressures that we must navigate carefully. Our first responsibility remains to our own people and our own continent. As the New Athens project's traditional methods became less viable due to increased awareness and countermeasures, intelligence indicated that similar networks were adapting their approaches. Cyber warfare, economic pressure, and disinformation campaigns were increasingly being used instead of or in addition to physical intimidation and violence. The African Intelligence Coordination Center was forced to evolve constantly to address these new threats. Dr. Cohn, now serving as the center's chief technical officer, led efforts to develop capabilities in digital forensics, social media analysis, and economic intelligence that matched the sophistication of the threats they faced. The fundamental objectives of foreign interference remain the same, Dr. Cohn explained to a conference of African security officials, but the methods are becoming more subtle and harder to detect. We must maintain our technical capabilities at the cutting edge, while also educating political leaders and civil society about these evolving threats. The center's work increasingly involved partnerships with technology companies, academic institutions, and civil society organizations that could provide expertise and resources beyond what government agencies could offer. This created new challenges in maintaining security while fostering the kind of open collaboration necessary for effective counterintelligence work. Ibrahim's government also had to adapt its own security procedures as threats evolved. The physical security measures implemented after Fatima's kidnapping remained in place, but were supplemented by sophisticated cybersecurity systems, social media monitoring, and economic intelligence capabilities. We learned that protecting democracy requires constant adaptation, Ibrahim said during a speech at the African Union's annual Security Summit. Our enemies are creative and persistent. We must be equally creative and even more persistent in developing ways to defend our sovereignty and our people. The success of Burkina Faso's response to the New Athens project had ripple effects throughout African politics that extended far beyond immediate security concerns. Other African leaders, emboldened by Ibrahim's example, began taking more assertive stances against foreign pressure and interference in their own countries. This led to a wave of policy changes across the continent. Several countries renegotiated mining and oil extraction agreements to ensure more favorable terms for their people. Others implemented new transparency requirements for foreign aid and investment that made it harder for external actors to use economic relationships as tools of political influence. The African Union itself underwent significant reforms, strengthening its ability to coordinate responses to external threats while also improving its capacity to mediate disputes between member states. The success of the African Intelligence Coordination Center demonstrated that continental cooperation could be effective when properly organized and supported. The Ouagadougou conspiracy was a wake-up call for all of us, said President Nana Akufo-Addo of Ghana during an African Union summit. It showed us both how vulnerable we can be to sophisticated foreign interference and how effectively we can respond when we work together with determination and strategic thinking. However, the changes also created new tensions and challenges. Some African leaders who had been comfortable with traditional patterns of dependence on external partners found themselves under pressure to adopt more assertive policies. Economic relationships that had been stable for decades came under scrutiny, and some international partners threatened to reduce their engagement with African countries that became too assertive about sovereignty. These tensions were particularly acute in countries with significant mineral wealth or strategic geographic locations. The competition between traditional Western partners and emerging powers like Russia and China for influence in Africa intensified as African governments became more selective about their international relationships. 10 years after the Ouagadougou conspiracy, Ibrahim and Fatima looked back on their experience with a complex mixture of satisfaction, sorrow, and determination. They had succeeded in protecting their family, exposing a dangerous network of foreign interference, and strengthening African capacity to defend sovereignty. But they had also learned hard lessons about the personal costs of leadership and the persistence of the challenges they faced. When I think about that night in the underground facility, Ibrahim reflected during a private interview, I remember feeling that everything I believed about justice and leadership was being tested. The easy path would have been to resign, to accept their demands, to prioritize my family's immediate safety over broader principles. But I knew that giving in would only encourage more attacks against other leaders, and would ultimately make all our families less safe. Fatima's perspective had evolved through years of working with other women who had faced similar threats. Her foundation had documented hundreds of cases of intimidation and violence directed against women in political families across Africa and beyond. The patterns were consistent and deeply disturbing, but so was the resilience and courage of the women who refused to be silenced. I learned that courage is not the absence of fear, Fatima said. Courage is the decision to act according to your principles despite your fear, to protect others even when you yourself are vulnerable, to remember that your individual suffering is part of a larger struggle for justice and dignity. The couple's relationship had been strengthened by their shared ordeal, but it had also been changed in ways that continued to influence their daily lives. They spoke more openly about risks and fears, included security considerations in every major decision, and maintained a level of vigilance that sometimes felt exhausting but was necessary for their safety. Their children, now adults, had chosen various paths that reflected their understanding of the responsibilities they had inherited. Some pursued careers in public service, others in academia or journalism. All carried forward a commitment to the principles their parents had defended, but in ways that reflected their own talents and interests. We raised them to understand that freedom and sovereignty are not guarantees, Ibrahim said. They are achievements that must be defended and renewed by every generation. What we accomplished was important, but it was also just one chapter in a much longer story. As Ibrahim's presidency entered its final term, he focused on institutionalizing the changes that had emerged from the Ouagadougou conspiracy. This meant ensuring that the African Intelligence Coordination Center would continue to operate effectively under future leadership, that the legal frameworks developed for combating foreign interference would survive political transitions, and that the spirit of African cooperation and self-reliance would be maintained even as specific leaders changed. The challenges were significant. Some of the international networks that had supported the New Athens project had reconstituted themselves under different names and with evolved methods. Cyber attacks against African governments had increased dramatically, and disinformation, Campaigns designed to create political instability had become more sophisticated and harder to detect. Economic pressure had also intensified as some traditional partners sought to punish African countries for their increased assertiveness. Development aid was reduced or restructured in ways that created new forms of dependence. Trade relationships were modified to favor countries that maintained more compliant policies. The struggle for African sovereignty did not end with our victory over the New Athens Project, Ibrahim told the African Union's annual summit. In some ways, it intensified as our enemies adapted their methods and increased their sophistication. We must remain vigilant, continue to cooperate, and never assume that the freedoms we have won are permanently secure. The Intelligence Center's annual reports painted a picture of constant adaptation and evolution in the threats faced by African governments. What had begun as relatively crude operations involving bribery and intimidation had evolved into sophisticated campaigns involving artificial intelligence, social media manipulation, and economic warfare. Fatima's foundation had similarly evolved to address new forms of threats against women in political life. Cyber harassment, doxing, and deepfake technologies were being used to intimidate and silence women leaders with increasing frequency. The foundation developed new training programs and support systems to help women navigate these evolving challenges. The success of the African response to foreign interference began attracting attention and emulation from other regions facing similar challenges. Latin American countries dealing with outside interference in their political processes sent delegations to study the African Intelligence Coordination Center's methods. Southeast Asian nations facing pressure from various major powers sought consultation on developing similar cooperative frameworks. What we learned in Africa is that small and medium-sized countries are strongest when they work together, explained General Gabriel during a presentation to the United Nations. No single nation, no matter how determined or capable, can stand alone against sophisticated networks of foreign interference. But when we coordinate our intelligence, share our resources, and support each other diplomatically, we can successfully defend our sovereignty. This success led to the establishment of similar coordination centers in other regions, with the African model serving as a template for South-South cooperation on security issues. The Global South Intelligence Coordination Network eventually included institutions in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, all working together to identify and counter patterns of foreign interference. The legal frameworks developed in response to the Ouagadougou conspiracy also influenced international law more broadly. Several countries updated their domestic laws to address political kidnapping and intimidation as forms of terrorism. International courts began accepting jurisdiction over cases involving foreign interference in domestic politics. The Burkina Faso case established important precedents, noted Professor Maria Santos of the University of São Paulo, who had written extensively about the legal implications of the conspiracy. It demonstrated that victims of foreign interference could successfully fight back and hold their attackers accountable, even when those attackers operated through sophisticated international networks. As Ibrahim prepared to leave office after serving his constitutional term limits, he reflected on the lessons that the Ouagadougou conspiracy had taught him about leadership, sovereignty, and the nature of power in the modern world. The experience had changed not only his presidency, but his understanding of what it meant to govern a small country in an interconnected but unequal global system. The most important lesson we learned, he said during his farewell address to the nation, is that sovereignty is not something that is granted by external powers or guaranteed by international agreements. Sovereignty is something that must be claimed, defended, and renewed through the actions and sacrifices of each generation. The speech was broadcast internationally and became a defining statement of the new African approach to international relations. It rejected both subservience to traditional powers and isolation from the global community, instead advocating for selective engagement based on mutual respect and shared benefit. Fatima's own farewell remarks focused on the lessons learned about resilience and the importance of building institutions that could survive individual leadership transitions. Her foundation had grown into a continental network with affiliated organizations in 32 countries, all working to protect women's participation in political life. "What we built together will outlast any individual leader or administration," she told supporters at the foundation's annual conference. The networks of cooperation, the institutions of mutual support, the legal frameworks for protecting sovereignty, these represent our true victory over the forces that sought to control and diminish African potential. The transition of power in Burkina Faso proceeded smoothly, with Ibrahim's chosen successor winning election on a platform of continuing the policies and international relationships that had emerged from the conspiracy crisis. The new president, Dr. Aminata Ouedraogo, was a former academic who had been closely involved in developing the continental response to foreign interference. 5 years after leaving office, Ibrahim and Fatima continued their work through various international organizations and academic institutions. Ibrahim served as a senior advisor to the African Union on security matters and was frequently consulted by governments around the world facing similar challenges. Fatima's foundation had become one of the leading international organizations working on political rights for women and had influenced policy decisions in dozens of countries. The African Intelligence Coordination Center had prevented hundreds of foreign interference operations in its first decade of existence. Its early warning systems had become sophisticated enough to identify potential threats months or even years before they might have escalated to violence. The center's training programs had educated thousands of security officials, and its research had informed policy decisions throughout the Global South. What we accomplished together changed the conversation about sovereignty and self-determination, Ibrahim observed during a speech at the University of Ghana, marking the 10th anniversary of the conspiracy. "We showed that small nations could successfully challenge powerful networks of foreign control when they combined strategic thinking, international cooperation, and unwavering commitment to their principles." The New Athens Project itself had been permanently dismantled, with most of its leadership serving prison sentences in various countries. However, intelligence indicated that similar networks continued to operate under different names and with evolved methods. The struggle between sovereignty and foreign interference remained ongoing, requiring constant vigilance and adaptation. The Ouagadougou conspiracy had become a case study in international relations, law, and security studies programs around the world. Books, documentaries, and academic papers had examined every aspect of the crisis and the response to it. The consensus among scholars was that the case represented a turning point in how small nations could respond to sophisticated forms of foreign interference. But perhaps most importantly, the conspiracy had demonstrated that love, courage, and principled leadership could triumph over networks of power and corruption that had seemed invincible. Ibrahim and Fatima's refusal to be intimidated had inspired similar acts of courage by leaders around the world, creating a ripple effect that continued to influence global politics years later. As they entered their later years, both continued to receive threats from various sources, reminders that their victory over the New Athens Project had made them permanent enemies of forces that profited from African weakness and dependence. But they also received constant messages of gratitude and inspiration from people around the world who had been encouraged by their example to stand up against various forms of oppression and intimidation. "The conspiracy tried to make us victims," Fatima reflected during her final public appearance before retiring from active advocacy. "Instead, it made us symbols of what is possible when people refuse to accept injustice and are willing to sacrifice for principles larger than themselves. That may be the most important victory of all." The presidential palace in Ouagadougou, where the crisis had begun, had been converted into a museum and research center dedicated to studying foreign interference and developing countermeasures. Visitors from around the world came to see the bedroom where Fatima had been kidnapped, and the command center where the rescue operation had been coordinated. But they also came to study the documents, intelligence reports, and policy frameworks that had emerged from the crisis. The Ouagadougou conspiracy was over, but its lessons continued to influence efforts to protect sovereignty and human dignity around the world. In that sense, Ibrahim and Fatima's victory had become much larger than their personal triumph. It had become part of humanity's ongoing struggle to build a world where might does not always make right, where love can triumph over fear, and where courage in the face of overwhelming odds can create lasting change.